Welcome to the Cartoon Art Museum for this afternoon's Toon Talk on This Land is My Land. We have Andy and Sophie, the authors of the book, here to talk a little bit about that process and what they've learned and all the experiences you've had along the way bringing this book to fruition. The book itself is about different people in the real world trying to figure out ways to make the ideal society and the various experiments and possibly mistakes that come along with that. And I'm really excited to hear, because I know that, especially in working with Andy in the past, that you always have very interesting projects. So I'm elated that you guys are both here today to talk about this project, and you know more about it than I do. So I'm just going to hand it over to you. You have a beautiful presentation for us today, and then after the presentation we will be having a signing for the book if you'd like to pick up a copy, and it also helps to support the Cartoon Art Museum, so we will let you know about that at the end.
Thanks, Nina. And I go way back to some of the earliest days of my published comics. Thank you everybody for coming. I'll just start off the presentation talking about how the book got started, the origins of it. The seed for what eventually became This Land is My Land was planted on a road trip along the I-80 back from Colorado to the Bay. And passing through Nevada, I saw a series of weird structures by the side of the highway. I pulled the soonest U-turn I could and turned around and went to check it out. This was not uncommon for me at the time. I was doing a lot of urban exploring, but this place was immediately different. Weird sculptures were everywhere. There were buildings built out of bottles. This was obviously someone's dream. The story was far stranger and sadder than I ever could have even imagined. It was built by Frank Van Zandt, aka Chief Rolling Thunder, a Quarter Creek man who was born in Indian Territory in the 1920s. And it was built as a monument to the Native Americans who'd had these lands taken from them. Van Zandt attracted a following of hippies and ended up sort of founding a commune, only to see much of his work destroyed by arson, the rest crumble before having his family taken away from him and killing himself. It was a singular and ultimately deadly vision. His uncompromising drive to create his own world fascinated me. I was doing comics about strange parts of the world at the time, like Fort Ord, an abandoned military base north of Monterey that's the size of San Francisco. So it seemed like good material. I started keeping a list of these places, whether I found them in a book, a Wikipedia hole, or stumbled across them myself by chance. The research broadened into a general fascination for utopias, whether intentional communities of hippies, and anarchists or weirdo, libertarian escapists with boat fixations. One of the universal traits that humanity shares is the dream of bettering one's surroundings. But it's a small selection of people that actually try to set up their own utopias, and each one I came across was as different as the one before. I first met Sophie in 2016 when I went to Denmark to teach a class at the animation workshop on applied comics, which was basically a euphemism for having She was a student of mine there. We then crossed paths again later that fall when she was an intern at the nonfiction comics publisher, The Nib, where I'm an editor. It was the election season from hell, and we thought it would be fun to do a quick piece aimed at people who were sick of it. I compiled a list of micronations, which are when people actually found their own nation with like flags and postage stamps and all these things. At some point when I fell into a research hole, and so we plotted it out as a guide to founding your own country as a way to escape it all. We called it Think Small. I wrote the comic, Sophie drew it, and we forgot about it for a few months. When we got approached later that winter and then in the spring to make a book out of the material, I remembered that list that I'd been keeping of utopias, and we broadened the scope from the original Nib piece's narrow focus on micronations to utopian projects, whether state-sponsored, driven by individuals or cults, or the singular artistic environments created by people like Chief Rolling Thunder. This is what became This Land is My Land. So that's the original table of contents from the webcomic from Think Small, and then this is the table of contents for This Land, so you can see the expansion of scope. The book was enormously fun, but it was challenging to put together. What counts as a utopian project? Pieces that ended up on the cutting room floor but were amazing but not utopian enough. Diversions included Biosphere 2 in Arizona, the largest enclosed ecosystem ever created by humans, which is meant to test the viability of building enclosed biomes in space, and was managed by Steve Bannon, of all people. Yeah, and it eventually descended into a crazy story of sabotage. They were literally like breaking the windows to get out and let air in, recrimination and lawsuits. But it wasn't actually Utopia, so I cut it. Or another was Darsuva, an attempt by Lithuanian intellectuals to set up a colony in Belize to preserve Lithuanian culture if the country ever ended up being occupied. The idea imploded and Lithuania was occupied by both Nazis and Soviets. I wanted stories that came from a wide range of backgrounds, people, and places, which meant ditching some of the more obvious and well-known places like Rajneeshpuram or Jonestown and doing some more serious digging. Sorting things into categories has always made them easier for me to digest, so I came up with a system of 5 chapters. The first chapter is Intentional Communities, which is about groups of people choosing to live a different way from their surroundings and carving out a community to suit themselves. Stories that we included in this chapter were things like a band of roving lesbians who road tripped across America in the 1970s and all changed their names to Van Dyke. A possibly fictional city in Madagascar founded by pirates who dedicated their lives to freeing slaves. A village in South Carolina whose inhabitants attempt to live what they see as a traditional life of the Yoruba, a large ethnic group from Nigeria. And a bizarre network of psychedelic tunnels under the Alps whose builders chose its location based on what they see as the energy lines of the Earth. The second chapter is Micronations. This was the expansion of our original webcomic. It's about people who actually went ahead and founded their own countries, no matter how small and no matter if anybody else paid attention to them. Unlike in the first chapter, they actually tried to get the world to recognize them as a viable nation. For some reason, this always involves the printing of many, many postage stamps. This chapter includes the story of the gay and lesbian kingdom of the Coral Sea Islands, which was founded as a protest against Australia's lack of marriage equality and actually declared war on Australia. A story about Ayn Rand devotees who built a geodesic dome and then attempted to found a tax and regulation-free floating nation only to be flummoxed over and over again by hurricanes. Or a raft in the Caribbean that was ruled by the younger brother of Ernest Hemingway. The third chapter is Failed Utopias, which is about pre-planned communities that were meant to radically reshape their inhabitants, usually but not always enacted by states, and what brought the grand experiments to an end. This chapter includes the story of Henry Ford's perfectly planned Midwestern American-style town that he founded in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, a pyramid cult in the state of Georgia, and a 16th century Venetian city built in the shape of a star, whose perfect geometric symmetry was intended to inspire a harmonious happiness in all who inhabited it. When no one showed up, the Venetians decided to populate the town with criminals instead. Then, the next chapter is Visionary Environments, which is about individuals who express the utopian urge narrowly on their own dwelling or property, spending their lifetimes building and perfecting the places that they live. This chapter includes caves carved out of the deserts of New Mexico, statues of masked gods in southwest China, and a modular floating island structure in the fjords of British Columbia. And then lastly is Strange Dreams, which is a chapter about utopian dreams and proposals that were seriously considered and planned but never came to pass. This chapter includes the story of the Bay Area's own contribution to the poorly thought out utopian communities, Seastead, a libertarian initiative to build floating offshore tax havens into which Peter Thiel pumped $1.25 million before he realized that it was heading nowhere and then decided to help fund Donald Trump's run for the presidency. So that's the structure of the book, and that's how it came to be. I'm going to close out my section by reading a sample chapter, The Arizona Mystery Castle, which is one of the more accessible places in the book. If you ever find yourself in the Southwest sort of noodling around looking for a day or two to kill, you can actually go here, except during the summer because it's too hot, as I'll get to at the end. So here's its story, and then I'll pass it off to Sophie, who will talk about drawing the book and bringing all this beautiful art together. In 1945, Mary Lou Gully received a letter from her father, who she'd just been notified had died of cancer. In it, he begged for forgiveness for having abandoned her and her mother 18 years before. And he told her to travel to the deserts of Arizona, where he built her a castle. Mary loved her father, Boyce Luther Gully, and had fond memories of building sandcastles with him as a child. When the waves washed them away, he'd promise her that someday he'd build her a real one. But Boyce vanished in 1927. Mary had received only an occasional message from him afterwards, declaring his love for her but never revealing his location. Boyce's posthumous letter explained that he'd been diagnosed with tuberculosis in 1927. It was a death sentence at the time. Wanting to spare his family the risk of infection and the sight of a slow death, Boyce had packed up his life and fled to Arizona, desperately hoping its dry climate would cure him. It did. But rather than send for his family, Boyce then spent the next 18 years single-mindedly building Mary a castle by hand and of recycled materials, and a home through mortar mixture made with goat milk. The obvious next step. The 8,000 square foot castle had 18 rooms, 13 fireplaces, a chapel, a dungeon, and no running water. It sported glass dishes and wagon wheels for windows. Salvaged telephone poles, train rails, and school blackboards formed its walls and floors. It was Mary's on one condition, that for the first 3 years that she lived there, she would not touch the trap door located between the chapel and the dungeon in a room that Boyce called Purgatory. And it drew this very scary-looking alligator up, just to make sure. Mary obeyed her father's instructions, and she had plenty to keep her busy. Finally, on January 1st, 1948, Mary and her mother opened the door. Underneath was a 9-foot deep pit. At the bottom was more gold, the deed to the castle, letters from her father, and a photograph of him, taken right before he died. As she examined the hoard, Mary noticed a scrap of paper. It was a valentine that she'd made for her father as a child. Mary and her mother stayed in the castle. She forgave her father. After the story got press, she opened up the castle for tours, many of which she conducted herself. Her mother died in 1970. Mary stayed on, living in the castle her father built for 65 years. She never married and finally died in 2010. The castle, now run by a foundation, remains open to visitors from October through May. It is closed in the summer months because Boyce Luther Gully never bothered to install an air conditioning
So as Andy said, I was interning with the NIP, and that's how I first got involved with this project. It was in 2016, and I have been studying graphic storytelling since 2013. It's a comics program in Denmark, and I had slowly become more and more interested in doing non-fiction stories, real stories about real people, which I also discovered in Andy's class, for instance. And so it was really exciting to go to Portland and work with the NIP. And it was really exciting to get this project because it was a subject that I didn't know much about myself beforehand. So it was a super fun script that I got, and one of the constraints for the webcomic was that it had to work both on mobile phones and on when you read on a computer. So that was the formal constraint for this project, and this is a chapter from the webcomic, and I solved that problem with fitting it to different formats by doing these three long panels for each chapter, and it was nice to find like a rigorous template, a way to organize it, because then I could be more free within this format and be able to do more visual research. So that's how this turned out. So when we suddenly had to turn it into a book, of course, that was a new challenge of how to lay it out. And since it was still organized into these small chunks. I needed to make sure that would work, and we also weren't very sure about the final organization of the book. We want to be able to shuffle the chapters around a little bit. So we sort of came up with it would be nice to do it still with comic panels, more traditional comics than the webcomic, based on a grid. Like here is a 6-panel grid, and then also doing a bit of splash page. And also we decided that they would all be organized as spreads, so we could move them around if we found out the subject matter would fit better later or something. Yes. The overall organization of the book into the 5 bigger chapters, we also had to, or it was obvious to work with color schemes for that, and I early on we had the idea it was sort of an atlas. We used the maps, and that made me think of the compass needles because it's such a beautiful shape. So these thumbnails over here are what eventually turned into the contents maps in the book that are at the top of each chapter. So these. Yes. But so I don't know if everybody in here are creators themselves, but I just wanted to show sort of the process, what it looked like. And this is what Andy's script looked like. So it was divided into pages and into bullet points, what do you call the numbers? So basically giving a structure and a rhythm to the book, but and all the text that's in this script is what went into the book, and it was stripped of any visual descriptions or anything, which was really amazing for me as an illustrator because I got to explore that myself and find that out myself. There are a few places where you had noted if it was really important, so a cross section of something. Yeah. So these are my initial thumbnails for the parts that introduce each chapter. And since Andy hadn't written so much, I could really go in and read the text and look for the metaphors he had put in there or visual clues, which was exciting. And early on, I looked for the 5 bigger chapters, I looked for a symbol I could sort of use to describe that theme. So for instance, in the Strange Dreams chapter here, he had used words like mirage and imaginary and dreams and nightmares. So I thought of this as something you can't quite grasp because all of the entries or all of the places in this chapter weren't actually realized. So the cloud became sort of a symbol for that, and the rainbow, these things that you can't actually keep, that will disappear. So that was exciting part of drawing this book. Then of course, this picture didn't look as pixelated. Something happened. Then I had access to a lot of exciting visual reference for the book because, it was different from each chapter because some of these places are very well documented online because of personal blogs or people with interest in that and journalists who have documented these places. And so this is one of the well-documented places, Auroville, which is a golden city in India, and it was founded by a woman named Mira Alfassa. She was born in France. She was an artist, traveled to India, and became infatuated with this Indian guru. She became his student and sort of a partner in some way in running the ashram. And then after his death, she decided to found her own city with these same spiritual ideals. And I really loved her portrait. She has these really amazing dark eyes. And then, of course, the city is still standing today, looking like this really beautiful, strange place. So I knew early on I wanted to make a big portrait of her, as we see up here.
About what year was this?
Sorry?
What year was this?
It was June.
I think she finally completed. It took like 30 years to build.
When did she start then?
She was born around 1817.
Because that looks like Epcot.
Oh yeah. No, it predates it. Yeah, it's this huge. golden
Predates by
dome.
quite a bit, but it looks like
and yeah, there's
Epcot.
a meditation center in the middle.
I mean, Disney's Epcot, but you
Yeah.
imagine not what they built.
Yeah, so
It's okay.
beginning of
1800s good.
yeah.
Predates Walt, that's all I was wondering.
Okay. Well,
I didn't mean to ask a trick question.
1964.
Oh, so but it was 20 years before that, because Walt passed away in 66. So his plans for Epcot were already there in 65. Maybe he copied her.
Yeah, but so this is what the final spread looked like with her portrait. Yeah, so that's that. This is the New Atlantis chapter from the book, or a little part of it. And this was one of the places that was less documented, or he was one of the people. Okay, so the story is it was founded by Lester Hemingway. Is that how you pronounce it?
Ernest's younger brother.
Yeah. Who was also a writer, but never really had much success. But after Ernest died, he wrote a memoir about his brother, and that earned him quite a bunch of money, which made him able to travel to Jamaica and start this micronation, print postage stamps, and the idea of it was to make this marine research facility. So I had found copies of the postage stamps online, but there were not really any documentation of the place itself. So this is one of the places where I had to make up, well, it was a bamboo raft tied to a car engine in shelter waters. So, yes. And this is in the micronations chapter. So I mentioned Palmanova, which was a Venetian town founded in the 16th century. And as Andy said, the idea was that this geometrical shape would induce this harmony and happiness in the people who live there. And there I had this amazing reference as well of this 16th century map, and decided to use that for the layout, as you see here. So that's the sketch here. And then it ended up taking hundreds of years to complete this town, and then eventually, when no one wanted to live there, they inhabited it by, pardon, criminals. Here's a picture of the ending process, which I drew all of the sketches I drew digitally on Mobile Studio, where I draw on the screen and then printed it out, and then it was drawn with the dip, nib pen, and the lightbox. So the chicken church in the Java in Indonesia is one of the few two-page stories in the book. So that posed a challenge in itself to get an entire story into this one spread. And that's where I had to sort of get creative with how to show this giant, amazing building in so little time, while also telling what went before it and after it. So this is about a man who lived in Jakarta and had a vision from God that he needed to build this prayer house in the shape of a dove, where all people from all religions could meet and Well, he got this far, but it has become known as the chicken church because it looks like a chicken. So this was the sketch for it, and that's why I feel like I went more back to doing the more illustrated text as was in the original webcomic with insert panels. It's also been documented very well in the documentary movie and with photos online. So I've been really dependent on all of these crazy photos I could find on a long image search, and Andy provided me with a list of the more further down links or weird sites with a reference. And so I just wanted to show you this shade because that is something I use in the final layout. It's a window in the church, and I used it more as a figure to show this vision that he had. Yeah. So the last chapter I want to show you was a bit from the place called Viertaville, and it's from the Strange Dreams chapter. So it was just to show you a bit from everything, and how you've also gotten a sense of the different color schemes I've used, that I've also tried to tie into the themes of each chapter. So the Visionary Environments chapter had more naturalistic colors, some more earth colors, and green and yellow as primary colors, whereas the Strange Dreams had yellow and purple as their primary colors because it was this stranger pair. And I tried to use a lot of many maps, Indie Loves maps. So I put as many maps I could in the book and timelines and whatnot. But yeah, that's the end of my part. So we would like to read another chapter from the book.
Yeah, let's close out with the story of Portlandia, which is one of my favorites. So, this is from the Failed Utopias chapter. Henry Ford is remembered today for introducing the Model T and dominating the American automobile market. He's remembered for his $5 a day wage and his 5-day work week and his virulent anti-Semitism. But in Fordlandia, Brazil, he's remembered as something else, an absentee founding father whose bizarre vision laid the plans for an abandoned outpost of a paternalist civilizing mission. Henry Ford needed rubber for his car tires, and he was forced to pay high markups to the British who had a monopoly on the stuff. So Ford partnered with the government of Brazil to establish a colony where he could grow and harvest his own rubber for export back to his plants in Detroit. He was granted a concession of 3,900 square miles on the banks of Rio Tapajos, major tributary of the Amazon. In return, Brazil would receive a 9% stake in profits. Ford saw this as an opportunity to create a model society to teach his new Brazilian workers American values. Fordlandia would look like Ford's ideal America, complete with a typical Midwestern-style house, as well as hospitals, schools, libraries, and swimming pool, playground, and golf course. Alcohol and tobacco were forbidden. Gardening and square dancing were encouraged. Sanitation squads killed stray dogs, drained stagnant water, and checked employees for vineyard diseases. But in 1930, only 2 years into Fordlandia's existence, Ford's Brazilian employees had had enough. It was the food that was the breaking point. The dining halls served unfamiliar fare like oatmeal, hamburgers, canned peaches, and brown rice. In what became known as the Day of Breaking Pans, the workers smashed their time clocks, chased the managers and cooks into the jungle, chanted "Brazil for Brazilians, kill all the Americans." The army had to be called in to put the uprising down. Meanwhile, the rubber crop was failing. Ford's agents had chosen land with poor, rocky soil and knew nothing about tropical agriculture. The experiment was abandoned, and in 1945, Ford's grandson sold it back to the Brazilian government. The sawmill and workshops rusted. The jungle reclaimed the hospital. But Fordlandia was never truly abandoned. Its population fell to less than 100, but in recent decades has rebounded to a few thousand. Many of its residents still live in the Western-style homes that Ford built. Most of the old structures, built with the best materials 1928 could offer, still stand. Ford dreamt of expanding automobile sales into Brazil, and his men had laid out 30 miles of road around the community to promote driving. Though muddy and pitted, they're still usable. Most residents, however, ride motorbikes. That's it. We hope you like the book. We probably have time for some questions if anybody has any.
Where would you want to live if you could live in one of them? Is there one that we should build?
There's actually
Try again?
Yeah. Well, so some of them end up well. They're not all terrible failed experiments. Just most of them are. I really think that it's a real Icaran urge. The closer you get to the sun, the more dramatic your fall. But there are a couple that worked out. I don't know, which one would you want to live in?
I don't know if this is boring, but one of the places are in Copenhagen, and I'm from Denmark. And it is really nice, this hippie town with weird buildings. It's called Freetown, Christiania. So,
Is it cold there though?
I'm used to Danish weather, but so I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, close to home.
I really like the temples of humankind I'd have to buy into their weirdo ideology, but there's this network of psychedelic tunnels underneath the Alps that were dug by this commune in secret until the Italian government realized that it was there and threatened to blow it up with dynamite. And then the press got a hold of the story and pictures leaked out. They're actually some of the most beautiful things you'll ever see if you look them up, or look at Sophie's beautiful illustrations of them. And so it was actually saved. It wasn't blown up. And unlike a lot of the other communities that implode as the founders get caught in enormous pedophilia scandals or whatever, there's some real dark stories in here. But couples of humankind that just sort of adjusted and became a tourist attraction. And they performed these synchronized dances out front, and that's part of their meditation, and grow vegetables, and really seem to actually live a quite nice life. So.
In the Italian Alps.
In the Italian Alps, in psychedelic tunnels. Seems cool. Yeah. Yeah.
Question for Andy. First thing, I love the knit. I think the knit is awesome. I was wondering, when you were considering alternative communities, did you think about anything online like Second Life?
Very briefly. That's a really, really interesting thing, and I, at some point, will probably write something about it. I listened to this great Reply All story about this community it was like a spaceship game. I forget what the game was. And they organized this famous member of it died. And the entire community organized this funeral for him where they got all the ships and crashed them together. And blew up. What's that? Yeah, that's it. That's totally fascinating to me. So I kept it in the physical world, except for the dreams one. But those were all planned for the physical world. But that's definitely, I'm keeping lists.
Okay. May I ask a question for Sophie?
Yeah.
I'm curious, so you laid everything out on the computer, I assume in Photoshop or Clip Studio Paint? Or...
Yeah, Photoshop.
Okay. I'm curious as to why you decided not to ink it digitally and print it out. You just like working practical?
Yeah, I do like drawing by hand, and I think actually drawing the sketches digitally was really a time issue, but also it's something I've been doing for a long time as I improved my drawing, because it's so much easier to scale things up and down and move them a little bit when I draw digitally. But I love drawing by hand, so I'm going more and more back to sketching by hand and doing fine art by hand. So it was really because I had to work on this book for 10 months and draw 160 pages, so I wanted to do something where I couldn't hit control or come and see all the time.
For those of you that aren't cartoonists, drawing 160 pages in 10 months is a monumental achievement.
If no one else has another question, may I ask one about the color?
Yeah.
I don't know if this is something that you see, but the style that you use to color this, I've seen reproduced by other artists like Erica Mullen, who does Bourgeois Sex Toy, and I've seen other artists in the nib use that coloring style. Is that something, how did you decide to color it the way that you did?
I think well, again, there's one thing which is time constraint.
Yeah.
So trying to make a color palette that I could use, which was sort of simple, but also gave me a range of ambience or atmosphere, so that I could still, so I like to use blue and yellow together because the blue has very specific properties, like more calm and can be really dark, whereas the yellow is really bright and more happy or quirky. So it was really like finding a balance between something that was simple, but something that could still be used for different moods, and something that could help tell the story. So, as I said, the visionary environments, I used more tones of gray and red and naturalistic colors because they were very rooted in the real world and physical places. So, yeah, it was a balance between those things. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the coolest things that Sophie did was that spoke to my love of categorizing so intensely was devising a different color palette for each of the different sections. And it's so apparent as you just flip through the book, you can figure out where you are.
I'll ask a quick question. Speaking of lists and things not quite done yet, are there any, as you obviously had to probably narrow down what you had in the book, are there any ones that you kind of wish now that maybe you had included in the book?
I actually I enjoy cutting. Like I take no, I'm also an editor, right? And our editor was absolutely wonderful in suggesting, very needed cuts, and when they happened, were immediately apparent to me that the book was far better without them. So you always, especially the ones that you do, a lot of research and stuff like that too. There's a little twinge when you let it go, but to be totally honest, I have these documents where I just have these Wikipedia holes that I've tunneled into, and so it's just another hole that it's it's the wrong expression, but it's it's research ends up on the cutting room floor all the time. Yeah, biosphere. I do miss biosphere. I probably will write something about biosphere at some point. But the nice thing about doing comics, especially nonfiction comics all the time, is that I could always revisit them. There was one thing that happened with this, was just that there's a billion stories about cults. There's so many amazing cults. Like Jonestown or Rusty's Prom, or these death cults everywhere. Everybody loves a good death cult. The cult in Japan, the Serenitas, they're way weirder than you ever imagined. They had an anime show about themselves. You can get real deep on cults. And so I really tried to hold back on cults because there was almost enough in there for just another book on its own. So I was very choosy about the cults that I let in.
Andy, you've obviously written and illustrated a number of your own books. What's it like to collaborate with someone else and let go of the illustration part, and how different was the process compared to if you did it all yourself?
The beginning of it was pretty much the same. The script that I handed off to Sophie is how I write for myself, which is actually why I think I probably don't write with a lot of descriptors, because as I'm writing a comic script, I'm usually seeing it in my mind. I do work with other artists at the Nib a lot, actually, for a lot of shorter things, 6-panel things, like the original webcomic with Sophie. So it's something I was familiar with. And it's actually very fun. I like it a lot because I have way more ideas and research and just all these things you could write about than I ever could have time to do. Physically drawing them myself, if I was drawing every single minute of every single day. So it allows me to tell more stories because, as Sophie can tell you, writing is way quicker than drawing this process. And especially collaborating with somebody like Sophie that is such an amazing artist and sort of has this, she immediately got all these different angles and different ways that I never would have dreamed of portraying it. And she also has a real knack for schematics and maps and cutaways and things like that are one of the things that I love the most about comics, because it's this way that the form can show this static image that you get lost into that you couldn't do with prose or a movie, things like that. You can't show a cutaway of the house and just sit there and let the reader go through the house. And Sophie killed it on that. She's really good about that. I would like to turn the question over to you and ask how it was working with a writer, because you also write your own stuff a lot too.
Yes, I feel like I'm still working a lot on my own writing, and that is part of the process that is difficult for me, actually. So it was amazing to work with a writer because, I don't have to question everything as I do when I write my own stuff, because I can see that it's working. But I think I also said, that I feel like there were just enough clues for me, ideas and visual, little metaphors in the language that I could use. But I'm pretty surprised by how free I've been. You have had, and because you're an artist, I could also ask for ideas about how to visualize something, which has been amazing. But it's been a good experience. Yeah.
Do you feel like working on this book, either in your personal experience with working on it or in collaborating together, how has that changed you, or are you still exactly the same as you were before?
I can answer first. I guess for me, I was thinking a lot about utopias and things like that anyway, sort of against the political ferment at the time, but also I was having children as this was getting off the ground. And so, having kids in the world, and you think about how much you want to make the world a better place for them, and then you take that to the logical extreme of building a pyramid cult. But yeah, I don't know. It's really fun for me to take a thing and a topic that has always been interesting to me and spend a long time just diving into it and breathing the air of utopia for a while. I don't know if it changed me. I think I remain politically idealistic in the long term and incredibly pessimistic in the short term. And I was before, I am now. Because it's both a beautiful thing that human nature allows people to feel like they have their own power and ability to make these spaces and to actually reach for that dream, and then to watch that destroyed over and over again by venality and human failings is sort of the theme of the book. And, how about you?
Well, I think my experience is a bit more practical, or what do you say? I mean, this was my first experience with drawing a longer book. So just that experience to work on this object, I think, has changed me, or the way that the work that I can see myself doing. But also, like, while drawing it, I've been like feeling like I was living the dream. Like, I can't believe this is my job to do this visual research and design this book. So yeah. But the question was, how has it changed me? Yeah.
And certainly, like, learning process, or like, I've seen a lot of fellow creators do their first long format book, and they were like the head of the class and able to pump out zines like nobody's business, but they get a long form book and it crushes them. And so it's great to see somebody kind of take that challenge on and be able to succeed really well and kind of grow and gain. It seems like you gain confidence from doing this book, that you can do more if you want to.
I will say so. Yes, probably.
I was wondering, what lessons did the two of you learn working on this book together that would help you improve your next book? What mistakes or miscommunications or tech problems did you have to overcome?
I don't know. It seemed to go pretty smoothly, but also writing is way easier than drawing. So I probably have a better perspective on that.
I think, I think so. The communication with Julia and between us went well, and so I think it was maybe more the communication with myself. That's the problem. I think so. Again, first time longer project. I think I would have given myself a bit more time to take a weekend.
Yeah.
So basically, being unsure about how long a book like this takes. But I mean, I think that's the only thing.
Yeah, figuring out how to not sort of lose yourself in a project when you're working on it for 10 months.
Yes.
It's always a learning experience.
Yeah. I think
something that I'm still trying to figure out through
that's
this.
what I hear
Yeah.
from other creators, that you're still grappling with it even on your second and third project. Yeah.
Sophie, what are you going to do next?
What am I going to do next? I'm just finishing up a picture book with a Danish publisher, with a Danish author, and it comes out in August. And after that, I'm going to take a month where I try to write my own projects. It's something I'm writing on, but carving out the time to write myself is, something I'm going to do in the month of June. Yeah.
I would like to say, by the way, that my 2-year-old twins give Sophie's children's books the seal of approval. Speak for me, Danish.
The name of this, so if anybody's interested in looking at your children's book when it comes out this fall.
Oh, well, the one Andy mentioned is called, it's a Danish title, It's about a clown. And the new book is actually a more young adult picture book. It's called #ParisJeTaime. Yeah.
Is there anything else you guys would like to add before we wrap up, or any last minute questions? How can people kind of find you or find your work afterwards? What's the best way for them to follow up on your site?
I would recommend that you go to Chronicle's website and buy the book itself. That's the first step. And then we both continue to do work for the Nib. There's a new issue of the Nib's print magazine that just came out themed around Empire that I had very late hand editing. So in that story and that I actually edited, so that was like a funny thing that happened. Very soon after this book wrapped was we went from being collaborators as writer and artist to collaborators as writer, artist, and editor. And it was fun. It's a story about St. Croix, which is great because I actually grew up there. partially. That's another weird connection that we have. So you can pick that up. It's got stories by both Sophie and me, and you can go to the Nib's website and check it out.
Let's give them a round of applause.